Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Sponsored by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Now let's explore the field of archaeology in today's episode.
Okay, welcome everybody. We got a great, exciting program for you today. And this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. Here, David, pretty shortly, we're going to have another sponsor, another corporate sponsor. Can you believe it? We've been at it for a year and a half. How many subscribers do you think our little old selves have got? I mean, we're not like Vanna White up here, you know, 236,000. Maybe by the end of July, we're going to be at 250,000 people. All thanks to people watching the program and subscribing, watching the shorts, watching Floors of the Lost Vaults, and of course, all the items that we're getting from the Museum of Archaeology and Biblical History and rare artifacts that we're sharing. David today, Dr. Graves, got his PhD from Aberdeen University. Did I say that right? Aberdeen University in Scotland. Yep. He's going to be sharing the Elgin marbles. Now, David told me I'm not supposed to lose my marbles, and that's true. And at the end, if it's not repetitive, I'll make a few comments from a curator's point of view. David, if it's going to be repetitive, I'll just go with the flow. And what you say could just be just good enough. And more than enough sometimes, right? Because you give us a ton of information and you're going to share with us a PowerPoint. So everybody, welcome to the program. My co-host, Dr. David Graves, and he's talking about the Elgin marbles. And if you don't know what it is, stay tuned.
Great, George. Good to be with you. And I see you've got a few marbles there in front of you, so maybe we can talk about
lose them. I
didn't lose them. We can talk about those after for a bit as well. So I'll get the PowerPoint started up here, and alrighty, well, we're all set here to go. You can see things okay?
Yes, good slide.
So we're going to talk about the Elgin marbles today, a journey from ancient Greece to modern controversy. And these are sometimes called the Parthenon sculptures, or better known as the Elgin marbles. And you might say, what's Elgin got to do with it? Well, the Elgin marbles, it's got to do with a gentleman by the name of Elgin. In fact, there's a little town not too far from me here in New Brunswick, Canada. It's called Elgin.
Oh, wait a minute. I got your book right here, David.
All right. Yep, there it is, hardcover.
The history of biblical archaeology, I went through it and, briefly went through it because it just arrived. Hardcover, great look, pictures inside, good stuff in there too. It's not a ton of information on all these materials. It's really precise information. So if you need a study material, and look it up real quick, there's your book for you folks, and makes you look smart, makes me look smart. David, I never give you credit, you know that.
Well, I use it myself. I have to look up stuff, and it's good to have a reference work not far from you. In fact, I've got it right here in my table as well, and it's just good to be able to pick it up. They're short reads, like 2 or 3 pages each for each of the archaeologists. And I trace the history of archaeology from the different periods along the different countries. So if you want to see what archaeology was, what was happening in Egypt, you can see there, or what was happening in Israel, Palestine, there's a section on that. The Assyrian, Babylonian, Iran, Iraq, sort of the history of how things were developing. So it's a good reference work. So we're going to talk about the Elgin marbles. This goes back to the first few chapters of the book. I deal with the Elgin marbles because this is sort of how archaeology all began in England and how the British Museum began to be populated. This is a painting of what the room looked like, museum in 1805. This was Townsley's library of a bunch of stuff that he had collected or looted. It looks a little bit like your office there, George.
What were you trying to say?
Lots of artifacts.
I didn't loot these marbles. They were thrown at me.
Yeah, I know how you've collected them, so that's all legal, and that's the good way of doing it. These folks did it to what they thought was legal as well. But there was a growing demand for museum antiquities, and it sparked this global treasure hunting, you might call it. Back in the 1800s, it wasn't so scientific back in those days. The iconic case was the acquisition of the Elgin marbles from the Parthenon in Greece. And it was driven by cultural prestige. Everybody wanted to have the best artifacts and historical preservation. They wanted to preserve them because what was happening was the locals were taking the marble and burning it down to make lime. So some of these statues seem to have come from the excavations at Hadrian's Villa. Some are fakes, so some of them are not real. We have the same issue today. And others were smuggled out of Italy as soon as they were found in defiance of a papal ban at the time on the deportation of antiquities. Here's what the Louvre was in the practice of collecting artifacts at the same time period. It's on the picture on the left is a painting of what the Louvre looked like in the 1800s. The right side is the outside of the Louvre today. This is a painting from the 1800s showing Phidias, who was the fellow who actually carved it, putting them on display and showing them to people when he carved them. The sculpture here on the left of Phidias is actually from the 1800s. Painting on the right is giving a tour of what it looked like in the painter's imagination, with the scaffolding there, and as they carved everything there in the Parthenon and how it sort of was all done. Just gives us a little idea of the background. Now the Parthenon parts, as I'm calling it, we have the pediment on the top, that's in green, and the cornice, the metrope in blue, all these images that they had carved out, these squares that line just below the cornice is what they call the frieze. The frieze here is a Doric format. The frieze in behind in red, these are the parts that are in the British Museum, the green, the blue, and the red. Columns are not there. The drum columns are not there. They're the original ones in Greece. I didn't take those back. So they basically cut the top parts out, took them back to England, and the bottom parts are left in Greece. Now, the gentleman here is Sir Hans Sloane. He is the fellow who had a house where he kept a lot of these artifacts, had his own collection, and that was turned into the first British Museum back in the 1700s. There's his house. So there's a growing demand for museum antiquities. So it sparked the treasure hunting. And so they went to town and went overseas and started to collect them all. So the British Museum started by basically collecting all these artifacts that were based on global treasure hunting. This is what the steps leading up the stairs. At the top, you have these stuffed giraffes, full size, and I think there's a rhinoceros there as well. But it just gives us an idea of how big it was. Of course, if anybody's been to the British Museum today, you see how large it is. So that's what it looked like in the 1700s. And you had to pay to get into the British Museum back in those days, and the Louvre was free. And today it's just the reverse. So it developed out of a private collection of Sir Hans Sloane. In the 1800s, the Elgin marbles were added from the Parthenon. Now, this is what the Parthenon looks like today. And the fellow who was in charge was Thomas Bruce, the 7th Earl of Elgin. And that's where the word Elgin comes from. The portrait of him there and from the Broomhall House in Scotland. So he was the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire in Istanbul. Now that's Turkey. In the past, it was called Constantinople, and today it's called Istanbul. And he removed the marbles between 1801 and 1812, so it took them a number of years to do it. And it was with the Ottomans' permission. He has a letter granting him permission to save the marbles from destruction because, as I said, they were being burned by the locals for lime. Since then, it's been deemed an act of theft and destruction, but really, they were saving them. This is kind of an interesting painting. This is Louis Flavel's house. Flavel was sort of put in charge of trying to rescue them. And so he got scaffolding from Greece and ropes and carts from the French government under Flavel. Now, what's kind of interesting is that right here, he's doing some painting of these Elgin marbles, but right here in the painting is one of the pieces of marble that shows the lapith and centers. He was denied access by the Greek mayor and the Turkish military governor, the Dishtar, from touching the standing section of the temple. So he couldn't touch the standing part, but he was able to get some of the pieces and parts from the top falling down. He hired Lucieri, an Italian landscape painter, to document the Parthenon sculptures, and he supervised the removal of the marbles from 1801 to 1812, interpreting Ottoman's permission to include dismantling sculptures. The removal caused some damage to the Parthenon, and some of the pieces were lost at sea as well, but they were trying to preserve them. Here's another painting Here are some of the marbles being displayed in their temporary Elgin room in the British Museum. Here are the trustees of the Elgin room sitting around admiring them. Financially strained, Elgin sold the marbles to the British government in 1816 for £35,000. I didn't do the conversion on that, but you can be sure it'd be a lot more money today compared to that then. But that was a lot of money back then. But he was able to pay for his exploits using the sale of the marbles. They were transferred to the British Museum for public display. Here they are today. They've been displayed there in the British Museum since 1939 in the new home, becoming a centerpiece of its classic collection. Here they all are, 5 years of work. The men stripped the Temple of Hearts.
Yeah, right.
Elgin died alone in poverty in France. Here they are today in their permanent home, and they've been arranged to reflect their original Parthenon layout, the Duveen Gallery. 1939. No doubt somebody donated a bunch of money to build this room named Duveen. That's how that stuff works. Here are some of a bunch of old photographs, which I found kind of interesting. Here is the porters taking them out of storage because they were taken down and put in an underground tunnel for safety during the Second World War. Here they're bringing them out after the war. They wanted to preserve them. There's one of the other panels, some of the horses being put up in the room in 1961. Just absolutely gorgeous. Here's some of the tools that they were using for cleaning them. These iron crowbars and things, and what they were using to take them down. Beautiful horse. Look at the carving on that horse. Just absolutely gorgeous. Here's another one, horseman from the Parthenon frieze. It's what it looks like from looking down the side. Hard to get good pictures there because it's usually filled with people. It's hard to get photographs of people in them. Here's the East Pediment here in the British Museum today. What some of the pieces look like. Lapis and the centaur. Another lapis and the centaur. And these things were removed from the southeast corner. Close-up of the southeast corner. And this is the northeast corner. And today there's one still remaining up there. And that's where one of them was removed from. And I put it back. So that's kind of how PowerPoint can work. Gone. We can replace it. So that's where that one would have been taken from. And the Eutherium there, these ladies were taken down and they were put in the British Museum. And these are concrete reproductions that they have produced in Greece and put up. So they do have reproductions. A lot of people walking by wouldn't know the difference whether they were the originals or whether they were concrete. But these ones here in Greece are concrete today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the controversy and the repatriation debate. So Greece built a new museum. This is it here, the Acropolis Museum. So here's Greece's case for repatriation. Cultural heritage, and that the marbles are an integral part to Greek identity. The claim of the illegal removal, that's questionable. Ottoman had given them permission. They claim it was colonial expatriation. And the modern Greeks' ability to preserve and display them in the Acropolis Museum. So they got a good place and a good home, so they should be taken back. Well, they already have a good home, some would argue. This is the guy, the general director of the Acropolis Museum, and he wants them back. And this is the museum where they want to be repatriated. This is the room where they would go. They've kept spaces open for the remaining marbles in anticipation of the return. So they do have some, they don't have them all. So there's some in Greece and some in the British Museum. They want them all back to Greece. Now, from the British Museum perspective, their case for repatriation is that they have illegally acquired them under the Ottoman authority and the right of ownership. Global cultural value. The marbles are part of a world museum in London with wide accessibility to a global audience. And there are preservation concerns in the past. That's less relevant today. The marbles are now safe in London. Even though they were damaged removing them, they would have been damaged probably by the Greeks as well if they weren't already burned totally for lime. So here's a bit of a table I put together, the key arguments in the debate. I won't go over all of them in detail, but there's the legal arguments, there's the ethical arguments, there's the practical arguments, and the precedent. The precedent has already been sort of set by the Benin bronzes who have been repatriated. You might say, well, what are the Benin bronzes? Well, these are from a place called Benin. This is Nigeria. And so these were looted by the British forces in 1897 from the Kingdom of Benin, Nigeria, during the punitive expedition, symbolizing colonial expatriation. This clear act of theft strengthens repatriation demands, paralleling debates over the Elgin marbles removal under the Ottoman rule. And so these were actually repatriated back to Nigeria in 2022 and 2025 from various museums around the world. So they basically cleaned out the museums and returned them to Nigeria, setting a precedent for addressing these colonial era acquisitions. So they restored the bronzes to the Edo people, for whom they hold spiritual and historical value, similar to Greece's claim that the Elgin marbles are integral to the cultural identity. That underscores the ethical argument against retaining looted, and I say looted with quotation marks around it, artifacts in Western museums. And so the Benin Dialogue Group facilitated the return and their plans for these being returned to Nigeria. And it was successful, offering lessons for potential Elgin marble solutions like loans or shared custody. Some have argued for that. So here we have the Elgin marbles will be given back to Greece within the next few years, experts claim. Whether that is true or not, hard to say, but there's an ongoing diplomatic talk between UK and Greece. As of 2025, there still hasn't been a decision made. Starmer here probably or more than likely will want to return them just for political reasons. He's getting closer and closer to the EU. So UNESCO and international pressure for repatriation. There's been proposal for loaning them, give them for a short while. The argument is, well, if we loan them to them, will we get them back? Probably not. In exchange, museum gives them theirs and Greece gives them theirs. And then we have shared custody between the two and the public opinion growing support for repatriation. And in some circles, that's just political correctness. There's a lot of this talk about repatriation going around about everything these days. The marbles are just one more object that they're kicking around for repatriation. My view personally, keep them where they're at. And they're safe, they got a large view, and no harm is done. And be done with all this political nonsense. That's my personal view. But what do you think, folks?
That's right. It's up for everybody's opinion, of course. And largely, David, I agree because, like you said, there's always a chance of damage when things are transported. There's a chance of theft when things are transported, that they don't all arrive. There's all kinds of unique things that can be manipulated. Hey, when they return, now we can only speculate, and then of course people could chime in. So I'm just stirring the pot here, right?
Well, George,
Let's say when they return, they might not be the authentic ones returned. Maybe they are, some type of marble substitute, poured marble substitute.
a reproduction. Yeah.
And then you
Well,
got a heck
George,
of a time trying to get them back, and then all this.
George,
What you're saying, yes.
you'd mentioned about damage. The precedent has been set there as well, because remember when they wanted to show the James ossuary in Toronto?
Oh, wow, you're right.
They shipped it by Fed Express. It ended up arriving cracked down right where the inscription was. I'll show a photograph of it. And they had to fix it and repair it. But yeah, so moving them again, more potential for more damage. So if people are concerned with, damage originally, keep them where they're at.
Right, exactly. And that's a good point. I forgot all about the James ossuary. I'll add something. I'll add something here in a second. This might be a little bit repetitive, but to the point. Like I said, I don't want to do too much restating of what you said. Let's see, and I in my notes yesterday, I put this in my cell phone. Not trying to be rude to people, but that's my notes on my cell phone. The British government and the British Museum have argued that they were obtained legally. And at that time, I would say they were.
Right.
That their return would be set a precedence which could undermine the collections of major museums in plural, not just between these two countries. And I'll explain that in a little bit. Museums of world culture, and that the British Museum's collections allows them to be better viewed in a context of other major ancient cultures. Sometimes museums, they're set up in a time sequence, in a cultural sequence. It's like having a crossword, not a crossword puzzle, but just you're putting together a puzzle, and all of a sudden you take this one piece and remove it. What does that do to your puzzle? What does that picture look like if you remove this one piece? As I can see the point. Better viewed in the context of other major ancient cultures, and thus complements the perspective provided by the Acropolis Museum. Discussions between the British and the Greek officials are ongoing. Okay, now this precedence. Now I got you just mentioned one I forgot about. You can add the picture of the James ossuary. Very good. Here's another one.
Right.
You know
Yeah,
what this is.
Rosetta.
Everybody knows what this is, right? It is the Rosetta Stone, very popular. Okay, Egypt has for years wanted the Rosetta Stone back. Now, that was set a precedence. Okay, if they get the Rosetta Stone back, how many other artifacts are in different museums that they're going to say we want that back as well? And if somebody returns an artifact to them, well, what does that other museum have that belongs to the other country? Will they return that? Well, if
Here's
I
a
give you
scenario.
this,
Here's
yeah,
a scenario for you. You know, if
yeah,
if we return all the mummies from around the world, from all the museums to Egypt, the only place you could see a mummy was in the Cairo Museum, and then war breaks out and nobody can get to it or it gets bombed. Having it scattered throughout the world gives us an opportunity. Remember when the war happened
right, yep,
and they destroyed the museums? I'll
it's
actually show a
peaceful,
photograph of one of those. And
right?
then they cleaned out all those. They damaged and ruined some priceless artifacts because of war. So it's a better chance for these things to be preserved. The ram caught in the thicket
Well, and a
artifact.
lot of artifacts that sold on the black market.
Yeah. Well, there's two of those. So we have one of them in the United States, and we have one of them at the British Museum.
Mhm.
So if something happens to one of them, we have another one at one of the other museums. So splitting it all up, um, I think is a good idea, and keeping them split up is probably a better idea. But continue with your argument.
You're exactly right. The Egyptians display the Rosetta Stone, for instance, that I have right here. Like you said, artifacts in multiple locations with a question mark. Why not? Well, like you said, natural catastrophes, governments overtaking another government, corruption and politics, theft. You said earthquakes, tsunamis, anything can take these things out. And one, yeah, it's good to have them dispersed. It really is.
Yeah.
Where would the artifacts be better preserved? Climates. One climate could be different than the other. Where could they be better observed? Some countries, how do you visit them? And another thing is just not politics, but also religions. Religious can make things sensitive as well, where there was a time where, remember when Sir Flinders Petrie, well, there were, let's say, foreigners that were at that time explorers in the 1900s, such as Sir Flinders Petrie, that were trying to explore the pyramids. And Petrie actually measured the pyramids, but many of them also in Jerusalem were chased away. I think Charles Warren was chased away at one time, right? Because of religious concerns.
Yeah.
I think Warren barely got away with his life. Petrie got by with measuring the pyramids, I think you mentioned in that podcast, because he did it while wearing a ballerina's tutu.
Yeah.
Because in Near Eastern cultures, there is exclusivities for those that present themselves as being, we'll just say, moonstruck. So anyway, we have an evidence. We kind of got an example of this in the biblical text as well. When King David, at that time he wasn't king, he was in a Philistine city. He needed to escape, so he's at the city's door and he's scratching at the city door and he's clawing at it. And it says he drools on his beard. So the people thought he was crazy, so they let him out because you want to let that go. You don't want that trapped inside your city, right? So yeah, we can see even in the biblical text how I'm off subject with fun stuff, but reasons why, just like you said. Now, in history, just like the marble in consequences, how about the Rosetta Stone? Well, the British obtained the Rosetta Stone from the French as a result of capitulation of Alexandria. That means they won a war against the French
Yeah, it was a
in
gift.
1801, which formally ended the French campaign in Egypt. Following a series of defeats by the British and the Ottoman forces, and the French surrendered and agreed in a stipulation to hand over all French archaeology and scientific discoveries, including the Rosetta Stone that was transferred to the British Museum at that time in 1802. And since then, it's been in the British Museum, the older and the new one. Okay.
Right.
But there we go. It wasn't just the marbles, it's also the Rosetta Stone. And that's all we're talking about at this time, right? Because I'm sure there's other ones as well that
Oh,
have,
there's lots of other
yeah,
artifacts.
tons. But, that was a good point. Yeah, you don't want all artifacts in one location because if that's the case, we'd have to go to that one location to see it.
Right.
And not only that, if something happens, it could all be destroyed.
Right.
And that would not preserve that culture either. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
During the Iraq War, um, the destruction of their museum there was just absolutely horrendous, and we lost some extremely unique and valuable artifacts. As archaeologists, we warned the authorities that it was going to happen. They didn't listen. They didn't move them, and they got destroyed, so and looted. And a bunch of them ended up. George, you can probably talk to this more than I can. They ended up on the black market, and
oh,
all these
absolutely.
all these seals that cylinder seals that became available and out of their museum, they're trying to be sold on the black market. So
Right, right. Now, there's one thing that I became aware of. I forget what it's been a long time because it's been over 20 years. I would frequent antiquity markets in Jerusalem, and I was looking just for a cuneiform tablet, and it was just to be an example of a cuneiform tablet. Didn't have to be translated, didn't have to know, of course, the size really didn't matter. It just had to be an example for a classroom environment in a church. So I'm thinking about something that might be a couple $100 that nobody's going to care about, right? It's just it'd be like an ancient letter, not important who wrote it, not important what it says, just the example. And I couldn't find one, not one. And I asked the dealer, he actually brought me in this room. He says, this room right here had shelves. He goes, used to be full. I said, of course, he's set me up for, I go, like, what happened? He goes, somebody came along and bought them all. Now, we're not going to mention who, all right?
okay,
But some years later, it came up that they had to return 17,000 artifacts back to the country because they were ill-gottenly gained, right?
yeah,
And it cost them. Now, if it was you and me, would be in jail because the fine was millions of dollars and they had to return them. So they lost tens of millions and they were fined millions. So,
mm,
it says that if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. And if you can't pay for it, don't do it. But there you have it, folks.
yeah.
And you
So
say, well, that's politics and whatever, but that's
George,
my little experience, huh?
you got a few artifacts there today as well. Some
These little marbles, yeah.
samples of some of the marble. We do find marble a lot. It's got a Cairo symbol I see on it, and
Yeah, so actually, by this, it's Byzantine.
yep,
Represents early Christianity.
the first two
You
words
find
for
this also
Christ,
on lamps, ancient lamps.
a good example.
Mhm.
A motif, and then you have another piece of marble there. It looks like a cornice or something, or a
Yeah, because this is smooth right here on the
okay,
top. If this is the top, so it looks like it was like you think an arch or something, not an arch, but like it's curved. Maybe
right.
it's the top of something that's broke off because it's broke here, it's broke there. So this could have been quite large, right? So I'm thinking maybe it was part of like an altar, in the Hebrew perspective of Bema.
You broke that off the church down the street, or
Yeah, it was Lutheran. I didn't want to. You know what? I kind of like Pope Leo the 14th. So I thought like, no, no, no. The Lutherans weren't paying attention, so I snapped it and ran.
yeah.
Now
Uh,
people
just
know that's. I hope they
just
realize that that's be. That's me.
just so the audience realizes, George and I like satire a lot. So
Yeah, right. You know what they say? When you first start getting your degrees, like a degree in religion, degree in biblical studies, we call it BS. It's a BS in religious studies. So you got to figure out this is part of the BS.
that's right.
But anyway, hey, a great presentation. I enjoyed it. I think that brings some attention uh, to the marble, as well as the consequences of interstate collecting.
Well, it opens up
Collecting.
the whole controversy of this. It's not the Elgin marbles just is an introduction and a good example of where this is going, and it's a pretty hot topic in archaeological circles. So I thought for the program today, it would be appropriate for us to introduce everybody to some of the arguments, pro and con, and you can have your arguments both sides, but don't tell me that politics doesn't enter into archaeology, because it sure
Oh, we
does.
know it does. Come on. It starts at the excavation.
Oh yeah,
It
yeah,
starts at the permit,
yeah.
And
That's
they
right.
kind of want to know where you're going to go. How's it going to be presented? is it, it depends on the government, what type of religious point of view it
Yep.
could get. Yeah.
And a lot of countries would allow us to bring artifacts back to do further study to our home countries.
Yeah.
Jordan has just announced, from what I understand, that they are no longer going to allow that. So that's going to stop. We did it. We were allowed to take some artifacts out of the country legally to do scientific work and testing, but
Right.
it has to stay in Jordan now. So they've just changed their view, and I think you're going to see that probably with a lot of other countries coming in the years to come. But so it is a very current debate and controversy, and one that we need to be thinking about as archaeologists. So
Yeah. Especially as tourists,
yeah,
because tourists, you sometimes you don't take it seriously. So you're in Israel, and how many do group tours between Egypt, Israel, Jordan?
yeah,
And what you see at a excavation site, because you can have group pictures, maybe even yourself, and the whole group is they got the picture taken on a mound of shards that are what we call non-diagnostic. They're just pieces, and there's just tens, thousands over years and decades, and they'll take a group picture on a ton of shards. So if somebody's walking around, you take a shard in Israel, usually nobody's going to care. But you try that in Egypt, you could end up in jail.
or Greece,
Or Greece, yeah,
and they
very
did.
easily. Especially you got different beliefs. Okay, so you're a white Anglo-Saxon in the wrong place at the wrong time, you can end up in a lot of trouble.
If you're a tourist in Greece at the Parthenon and you pick a piece of marble up off the floor and put it in your pocket, you're
Mhm.
going to jail if you get caught. So don't do it. Not advised at all in any country to pick artifacts up, just laying on the ground. If you do, turn them over to your tour leader or to the archaeological authorities, because it is illegal and you will get yourself in a heap of problems.
Right.
Just a word to the wise. The stuff that we have in our collections are legally acquired and done with permits, and just to know.
So yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, I guess the end of our podcast today. I really appreciate your PowerPoint and everybody that has watching, liking, and subscribing and supporting. Appreciate it. Like I said, we are also going to pick up another sponsor, and going to be asking other museums to also participate. Just something off the top of my head, David, I didn't talk about this with you, is we had a group. I'll just not, I shouldn't say we, but friends that were over digging at Shiloh, excavating at Shiloh, and had a pretty tough time getting back.
Right.
And they are they back? I've seen pictures of them in Egypt. Are they back now?
Yeah, they're all back safe. They all made it. They crossed over into Jordan and then traveled down to Egypt and then
Mhm.
flew out of Cairo back to the States. So, and Canada and other countries. There's other,
Right. So then Gary's back, Dr. Gary Byer,
yep,
Dr. Scott Stripling. Of
yep.
course, Scott, but I attended classes with Dr. Stripling years ago. But I know that you two excavated together. Maybe I excavated, maybe you, I don't know, I forget. I remember seeing him at the excavation at Tel El Hammam.
Yeah.
Um, I think we were both working on our masters at that time or something going on. It's a long time ago. He's come a long way. And then Gary showed up later on, and I know he was Dr. Stephen Collins' second in command, I think, over at Tal El Hammam, and now he's working with Dr. Stripling at Shiloh, and hopefully we can get him on soon.
Yeah, we'll try that to get an update. There was some pretty amazing things found at Shiloh this year. I can't speak of them, but they can, since they excavated there. So we'll try and get Dr. Stripling and Dr. Byers on the program and see if we can get an update, which would be pretty interesting.
That'd be a lot of fun, and glad that they made it home safely, because things got pretty scary there for a while for him. Couldn't get a flight.
Yeah, they got a
Hardly got.
photograph. They've got a
Yeah.
photograph of um, the Shiloh Center, tourist
Mhm.
center, with rockets flying over and being intercepted, which is I'd not seen that before being there. So that was a bit harrowing, but they dug right through to the up until the very last day. And then they were forced to shut down because of safety and then trying to get out of the country. So
Now, rumor has it that you tried to go.
I was thinking of going this year, but it was too late. I couldn't get things pulled together, and so I decided not to. Probably providential that I didn't go because of what happened, but um, you just never know when you head off for these countries. And we've got a few other things planned as well. We've got, I think, for next week, we're going to be talking about some Philistine stuff.
No, Philistines. Yeah, we're going to talk about forging.
Yeah, so we're going to talk
Not,
about
not
some metal.
pilfering, not pilfering or looting, forging.
No, we're going to go from marbles to
Wait a second.
metal.
I was ready for you.
About,
It doesn't look like much because they're kind of rusty.
we're going to be talking about those bad boys.
Yeah. So we're gonna put the best of metal together.
Great. Well,
Fun
George,
stuff.
good
Look at this point on
podcast today.
I got the marble right here, so you can see the point on that one.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah.
Everybody have a great day. Thanks for participating. Stay with us next week. More cool stuff. Of course, if I can show you what's behind me, we picked up so much stuff from the museum vaults. Man, if I could just scoot out of the way, there's just more and more and more. Some of it you've seen before, but it just keeps on going back. And also on the shelf back there, I also stuck some more stuff in the, well, that's mummy sarcophagus. And, so we can only talk about a little at a time. So, all right, everybody, you have a great day. David, thank you. And I'll see you next week.
Good to be with you, George. Have a good week.